The courtroom falls silent as Elon Musk, with a sly smile, counters Judge Amy's toughest question, not with a lawyer's help, but with his own unstoppable mind. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse loomed under a gray, brooding sky as news vans lined the block, satellite dishes pointing upward like steel flowers. Crowds of journalists, protesters, and curious onlookers gathered behind barricades, their breath visible in the cold morning air. Cameramen jockeyed for position while anchors, speaking in urgent tones, reported live on what was being called the trial of the century. Inside, the marble halls echoed with hurried footsteps, legal clerks shuffling papers, and the distant hum of whispered speculation. Everyone knew today would be historic, not just because of the law at stake, but because of who was about to step into the courtroom. Elon Musk arrived not with a team of high-priced lawyers leading the way, but walking alone, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Dressed in a sharply tailored dark suit, he carried no notes, no briefcase, only an aura of defiance and brilliance. This was the man who launched rockets for fun, joked about colonizing Mars, and bought entire companies with a single tweet. Yet today he was not facing a boardroom, a shareholder meeting, or a launch pad. Today he was facing something far less predictable: the sharp mind of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Sitting at the bench, Judge Barrett adjusted her glasses, scanning the courtroom with a gaze that had unraveled some of the finest legal arguments ever made. Known for her precise questions and no-nonsense demeanor, she was a towering figure in American jurisprudence. Respected, formidable, and entirely unafraid of challenging authority. She had faced presidents, senators, and titanic legal battles, but never had she squared off against someone like Musk. Two brilliant minds, one courtroom. Sparks were inevitable. The murmurs died instantly as the bailiff called the courtroom to order. Every seat was filled, every aisle crammed with observers hungry for the clash they had all come to witness. The walls, lined with imposing portraits of past justices, seemed to lean in closer, as if history itself was holding its breath. A tense hush blanketed the room, broken only by the soft clink of chains on a journalist's camera strap and the occasional shuffling of papers. All eyes were drawn to the center, to the two figures about to define the day. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, robed and regal, surveyed the courtroom with a look of cool authority. Her gavel struck once, sharp and final. She peered over her glasses at Musk, who stood at the defense table, hands loosely clasped behind his back, posture relaxed yet alert, as if preparing for a launch countdown rather than a legal showdown. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice carrying the crisp, cutting edge of a practiced jurist, "I expect full decorum in my courtroom. No theatrics, no provocations. This is not a board meeting. This is a court of law." The tension thickened, and somewhere a pen dropped to the floor with a sharp click. For a moment, there was no sound but the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Musk inclined his head slightly, a small, respectful nod. "Understood, Your Honor," he said smoothly, his tone void of mockery, layered instead with a surprising sincerity that caught a few seasoned reporters exchanging glances. Yet beneath the respectful words there was an unmistakable glint in his eye, a signal that he was not here simply to play by old rules. He was here to challenge the very system, but on its own terms. Judge Amy leaned back, steepling her fingers. She studied him for a moment, then pressed forward, her next words deliberate and sharp. "Innovation is one thing, Mr. Musk," she said, "but knowledge of the law is another. Being a genius in technology doesn't grant immunity from the responsibilities or consequences laid out by this nation's legal framework." There was a subtle shift in the room, the invisible weight of the moment settling on every listener's shoulders. Some in the gallery leaned forward instinctively, sensing the brewing storm. Musk smiled, just slightly, the corners of his mouth twitching upward as if amused by the challenge, but too disciplined to show it fully. He didn't interrupt, didn't react explosively as some might have expected. Instead, he simply listened, absorbing each word as if calculating the perfect trajectory for his next move. He shifted his weight casually from one foot to the other, exuding an effortless calm that belied the gravity of the situation. Judge Amy adjusted her glasses again, the smallest of movements, but one that signaled a shift in gears. The court reporter readied her fingers above the keys. The first round of questioning was about to begin, and the intensity in the room sharpened like a blade being drawn across a whetstone. "Mr. Musk," Amy began, her tone even but edged with steel, "you operate one of the largest communication platforms in the world. Are you aware of the legal implications tied to the dissemination of information on your platform?" Musk clasped his hands loosely before him, standing like a man giving a lecture at a tech summit rather than responding to a federal judge. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, voice calm, measured. "Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act provides certain immunities to platform providers, unless they actively participate in the creation of illegal content." The courtroom collectively inhaled, not because he answered, but because he answered correctly, almost word for word from the statute. A few heads turned toward each other, eyebrows raised. Judge Amy's eyes narrowed slightly. She pressed harder. "And what about corporate responsibility? When your platform allows misinformation to spread, who bears the ultimate accountability?" There was a beat of silence that stretched just a second too long. Then Musk tilted his head, a signature gesture of thoughtfulness. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "historical precedent, particularly the Supreme Court's decision in New York Times v. Sullivan, establishes that responsibility in cases of misinformation depends heavily on the presence of actual malice. Mere negligence isn't sufficient." Whispers spread like wildfire through the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched urgently against notebooks. Some even abandoned note-taking altogether, preferring to simply stare. Judge Amy raised one eyebrow. "You're citing Sullivan to defend your platform's approach?" Musk's lips twitched again into the ghost of a smile. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I'm highlighting the boundaries the court itself set between free speech and defamation. Public discourse is messy but necessary. Suppressing it under fear of liability would fundamentally undermine democratic principles." For a fleeting moment, Amy's gaze flickered, not with approval, but with the slightest hint of intrigue. The scene shifted. A silent montage unfurled in the mind's eye. Elon Musk, in the dim glow of his library at home, surrounded by heavy law tomes and printouts of Supreme Court cases. His desk littered with sticky notes scribbled in a rapid, sharp hand. A whiteboard crammed with legal concepts. Platform neutrality, public forum doctrine, compelled speech. Video calls with sharp-eyed constitutional law professors. Musk listening intently, firing questions that left even the academics blinking. It wasn't cramming. It wasn't surface-level knowledge. It was the same intensity he had once poured into learning rocket science, code, engineering, now turned onto the law. Back in the courtroom, Judge Amy changed her tactic. "And what about liability for harm caused by content moderation decisions themselves, Mr. Musk? Surely you know the implications." Musk's eyes glinted. "Indeed. As established in Zirin versus America Online Inc., courts have consistently held that liability doesn't shift to platforms for decisions related to removing or retaining content. Courts have reasoned that editorial decisions are protected, even if they are poor or negligent." Another ripple of gas traveled through the room like electricity. Somewhere in the gallery, a veteran attorney whispered to a colleague, "He's quoting Federal Circuit cases now? Without notes?" The court clerk's pen froze mid-sentence. Judge Amy leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, studying him not as a rebellious billionaire anymore, but as an opponent who had come prepared for war. The exchange continued, volley after volley, but the dynamic had changed. This was not a man winging it on charisma alone. This was a man who had learned the rules of the game and was ready to play at the highest level. And for the first time, deep beneath her composed exterior, Judge Amy Coney Barrett knew this would not be the straightforward judicial lesson she had expected to deliver. Judge Amy tapped her pen once, twice against the thick stack of documents in front of her, the sound sharp in the stillness of the room. She knew Musk had come armed with facts, cases, and precedents. Fine. She would shift the battleground. "Let's move beyond precedent for a moment, Mr. Musk," she said, voice steady but with an undeniable edge. "Let's talk hypotheticals." Musk's eyebrows lifted slightly, not in alarm but in curiosity. He nodded once, signaling for her to proceed. Amy leaned forward, fixing him with a gaze that could freeze a wildfire. Suppose your company, X Corporation, develops an AI algorithm. It mistakenly flags peaceful protesters as threats, leading to wrongful arrests. Would your company be liable? There was a pregnant pause. The question was a minefield. Free speech, civil rights, corporate accountability, all tangled together. Musk didn't flinch. He let the silence stretch a second longer, commanding the room. Musk didn't flinch. He let the silence stretch a second longer, commanding the room's full attention. Then he replied, "Innovation will always carry risk. Responsibility exists, but it must be balanced against the essential need for progress. Penalizing developers for unforeseen flaws in complex systems would cripple innovation at its root. The correct legal response would be measured, encouraging remedy, not punishing ambition." There was a soft murmur from the gallery. Some nodded, impressed. Others frowned, skeptical. Amy didn't miss a beat. "And if one of your companies, say SpaceX, establishes a colony on Mars and a life support system, fails due to a decision made based on Earth-based regulations, who would hold jurisdiction? Who would bear the blame?" Musk smiled now, not arrogantly, but like a man stepping into familiar territory. "That's precisely why we must begin crafting new legal frameworks for extraterrestrial settlements, Your Honor. Colonial legal systems have historically been modeled on Earth governance, but Mars will require adaptive principles, perhaps a blend of maritime law, international treaty frameworks, and novel constitutional protections." The courtroom stiffened. It wasn't just an answer. It was a vision, a glimpse of a future no one else dared to prepare for. Amy's jaw tightened slightly. She saw it happening. Musk was turning every trap into a launchpad. Every moral dilemma thrown at him became an opportunity to expand the conversation beyond narrow legalities into philosophy, humanity, and the very future of civilization. She pressed harder. "So you advocate for minimal government oversight? Even when lives are at stake?" Musk's expression turned solemn. "I advocate for intelligent oversight. Governance that understands risk is inherent to advancement. Every leap in history, from the printing press to aviation, carried risk. Mars will be no different. Law must evolve alongside technology, not suffocate it." He said it without hesitation and without apology. Amy's fingers tapped in a irregular rhythm against the desk. She had faced senators who buckled under this kind of questioning, CEOs who crumbled under the spotlight. Yet here stood Musk, answering not as a businessman protecting assets, but as a visionary defending an entire philosophy of human progress. There was a flicker of visible frustration across Amy's otherwise composed face, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes, a fractional straightening of her posture. She masked it well, but anyone truly watching could tell. Musk had disrupted the structure she had carefully laid. This was no longer a legal examination. It had become an ideological duel. The court sat suspended between awe and tension. Somewhere near the back, a law student audibly whispered, "This is history." Judge Coney Barrett tapped her pen once more against her papers. She adjusted her robes slightly, maintaining her outward calm. If Musk wanted to play the long game, she would meet him there, and she would make sure the real weight of the law would be felt before this battle ended. The next questions would be harder still, and Musk would have to prove that his mind was as durable as his ambition. The tension in the courtroom was a living, breathing thing now, threading between the pews, hovering near the judge's bench, clinging to every whispered word. Judge Coney Barrett watched Elon Musk carefully, her mind recalculating. He wasn't just surviving this. He was steering it. Musk shifted slightly behind the defense table, adjusting the microphone. His tone shifted too, from measured defense to something more deliberate, more commanding. "If I may, Your Honor," he said, with an unusual formality that made a few heads snap upward, "I would like to present direct examples where corporate innovation required legal navigation, examples where I personally intervened to ensure both compliance and progress." Amy studied him for a long moment. Then with a slight nod, she granted him the floor. Musk turned toward the gallery, his voice rising with a quiet power that didn't need theatrics to dominate the space. "In 2018, During the ramp-up of Tesla's Model 3 production, regulatory standards threatened to halt the installation of fully autonomous software updates. I personally met with NHTSA officials and with our legal team, proposed a phased compliance framework that later influenced national guidelines. There was a stir among the observers. Musk wasn't boasting, he was detailing precise legal intervention. At SpaceX, he continued, the first fully reusable rocket program faced suspension over airspace safety concerns. I personally reviewed the FAA regulatory code, challenged outdated interpretations, and helped secure waivers through a detailed argument citing evolving aerospace law and risk analysis models. Amy's pen stilled mid-note. And with X, Musk said, pausing just slightly, I negotiated content moderation standards during international disputes, not by censorship, but by appealing to international law principles of free expression, ensuring that no singular government could dictate the terms of public discourse without due process. The courtroom rippled again. Not outrage this time, but a grudging awe. But Musk wasn't finished. Furthermore, he said with a glance toward Judge Amy, I would like to call a witness. A low gasp swept through the room like a sudden breeze. Amy's brow furrowed slightly. She hadn't been informed of any additional witnesses, a risky move in a courtroom so tightly controlled. But there was no objection from the prosecution. Curiosity had paralyzed even them. From a side door, a tall figure stepped into view. Older, dignified, with a distinct air of academia. The buzz began immediately, the kind that would ripple across every news outlet within minutes. Professor Alan Whitmore, a titan in constitutional law, a man whose lectures packed auditoriums, whose legal theories had been cited by courts worldwide. He approached the stand and was sworn in without delay. Judge Amy leaned slightly forward. She knew Whitmore's reputation well. This wasn't a stunt. It was a calculated checkmate. Under oath, Whitmore confirmed what Musk had hinted. For the past 2 years, in secret sessions late at night, Musk had been studying law under his personal guidance. Constitutional frameworks, regulatory interpretation, landmark Supreme Court cases. Musk hadn't simply brushed up, he had immersed himself. Mr. Musk, Whitmore said from the witness stand, his voice deep and resonant, is among the finest analytical minds I have encountered. He approaches law not as a field of constraint, but as a system of optimization, understanding not just what is, but what must evolve. Outside, the media exploded. Within minutes, headlines blared across smartphones in the gallery. Elon Musk, secretly trained by legal legend. Musk stuns court with legal masterclass. Professor Whitmore. Musk is redefining legal innovation. Reporters rushed to the exits, phones to their ears, desperate to beat the flood of breaking news. Judge Amy remained still, her judicial mask never fully slipping. But inside, she recalculated again. Musk wasn't here to rebel against the court. He was here to demonstrate that he understood its architecture, its language, its very DNA. He hadn't come simply to win. He had come to reshape the conversation. For the first time in many sessions, Amy felt the stirrings of something she rarely encountered from her position behind the bench. Respect, reluctant, wary, but real. Musk turned back toward her, waiting, poised, unshakable. And Judge Amy realized something undeniable. Musk wasn't merely smart. He was strategic. Strategic enough to make the law, the court, even public perception, part of his latest, greatest engineering project, the architecture of influence itself. The battle wasn't over, but the board had been tilted, and Amy knew the next moves would demand every ounce of her skill if she hoped to match him. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted once more, but this time it was more subtle, like a tide pulling out before a tsunami. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who had steered the session with firm hands from the very beginning, now sat just a little straighter, her fingers laced tightly on the bench. Musk, still standing at the defense table, adjusted his tie casually and then, with complete deference to courtroom protocol, she asked, Your Honor, with permission, may I pose a few questions for clarification? The request itself was unorthodox. Judges asked questions. Defendants answered. But Amy, compelled by the strange gravitational force Musk now exerted over the room, nodded once. "Proceed briefly, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice clipped. Musk stepped forward, each movement deliberate, like a chess master sliding a piece into place. If a platform, by moderating content to comply with international laws, inadvertently restricts constitutionally protected speech within the United States, Musk began, is it then liable for violating free speech protections domestically? Or compelled to violate sovereign law abroad? There was a sharp intake of breath among the lawyers seated behind the bar. Amy opened her mouth, paused, recalibrated. It would depend on the jurisdiction involved and the manner of enforcement, she replied. But even as she spoke, the complexity of the dilemma hung in the air like a blade. Musk pressed respectfully. And if enforcement mechanisms conflict, say a government demanding takedown of political dissent, while U.S. law protects that dissent, which standard governs a global platform's obligations? He wasn't grandstanding. He was dissecting. Amy leaned back slightly, a defensive posture so small most would miss it, but not Musk, and certainly not the cameras broadcasting the session to millions online. A soft murmur ran through the courtroom, a ripple of realization. Musk wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was leading the dialogue. In the case of Tesla, Musk continued, should we comply with one state's stricter environmental guidelines, even if it impedes our ability to meet federal safety standards? How does regulatory supremacy apply when two authorities directly conflict? Amy's lips pressed into a tight line. The questions weren't random. They were precise, targeted, pulling apart the tangled net of modern regulatory law in real time. She answered again, framing her response around federal preemption doctrines. But Musk listened intently, his eyes sharp, catching every nuance. "And what?" he asked, his voice a little softer now. "About innovation not yet imagined by the law? Mars colonization, autonomous governance systems, AI-driven medical diagnostics. If no current framework exists, should innovation wait for permission or proceed responsibly while law evolves in parallel?" The gallery buzzed. Even seasoned legal analysts following the live feed online began posting frantic updates. "Musk is flipping the courtroom dynamic. Incredible. This isn't a defense. It's a new kind of argument entirely." Amy hesitated, not because she lacked an answer, but because there were no easy answers. Musk had pushed the discussion into spaces where law lagged behind possibility. The power shift was undeniable. Where once Musk had been the one answering to the law, now it was the law, through Amy, answering to Musk's questions. Judge Amy Coney Barrett tightened her hands around her gavel, reclaiming her composure by sheer will. She gave a measured nod. "Mr. Musk, these are important questions, but it is the task of the courts to interpret the law as it stands, not as it might one day become." Her voice was strong, but something had changed. The authority was still there, but the narrative had cracked open. Shared now between judge and defendant, logic and vision wrestling in the open. Musk stepped back, his final point made without arrogance, only clarity. He had not humiliated the court. He had expanded it, forcing everyone inside to reckon with the future rushing toward them. The audience, both in the room and watching across the world, understood what had just happened. This wasn't just about Elon Musk defending himself anymore. It was about Elon Musk challenging the very assumptions of governance, regulation, and progress. The courtroom had turned, and Judge Amy Coney Barrett, for all her brilliance and command, knew she wasn't just presiding over a trial. She was witnessing the start of a revolution. The courtroom felt heavier now, as if the very walls were bearing witness to something rare, something they were not designed to contain. Silence reigned, thick and reverent. Even the scratching of pens and the clicking of cameras had faded, replaced by a collective anticipation that crackled through the air. Judge Amy Coney Barrett regarded Elon Musk from the bench with the calm dignity of her office. But beneath that, something more human flickered. Curiosity, intrigue, and a reluctant, hard-earned respect. Musk stood alone, no papers, no notes, no legal team whispering strategies into his ear. He placed his hands lightly on the podium, his body language as composed as it was unguarded. He glanced once around the room, at the media, the lawyers, the spectators crammed into every available seat, and then he began his closing statement. Innovation, Musk said, his voice steady and resonant, has never been a comfortable process. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle deeper. Every leap forward in human history, electricity, flight, the internet, challenged existing structures, rules, and expectations. It's not because innovators believe they are above the law. It's because the laws we rely on are written for a world that already exists, not the one that's being built. He turned slightly, not to the judge, but to the idea of law itself, as if addressing a living entity. I don't seek to break the law. I seek to help it evolve, to inform it, challenge it, and push it to anticipate the future rather than react to it. Without that friction, we stagnate. We retreat into safety, and humanity does not thrive when it retreats. Musk's gaze returned to Judge Amy, steady and sincere. I stand here today not in defiance of the law, but in conversation with it. Innovation is not the enemy of order. It is the engine of progress. He stepped back, signaling the end of his statement. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, just clarity, certainty. A message delivered with the same unshakable momentum that had launched rockets into the sky and ideas into the public imagination. For a long beat, Judge Amy said nothing. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile touched the corners of her mouth. It wasn't wide, it wasn't soft. It was the kind of smile that acknowledged something undeniable. A worthy opponent, a mind that had stood its ground, and a moment of rare mutual recognition. She tapped her gavel lightly, once, a sound more symbolic than commanding. The court will deliberate on the arguments presented, she said, her voice as even as ever. This session is adjourned until the rendering of the verdict. The bailiff called out the formal end of proceedings, but few moved. Reporters fumbled with microphones. Lawyers sat stunned. The audience, inside and out, knew that what they had witnessed was bigger than any one decision. As Musk turned to leave, he and Amy locked eyes one last time. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Respect had been earned, not given lightly, not cheaply, earned in full by fire and intellect. And as Musk exited the courtroom into the flashing storm of cameras and questions, the world outside exploded with speculation. But inside, between two minds forged in different worlds, law and innovation, a bridge had been built, fragile, unexpected, and absolutely historic. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had reached a fever pitch. Camera flashes lit up the overcast afternoon like bursts of lightning. Journalists shouted over each other, scrambling for quotes, reactions, anything that could capture the magnitude of what had just transpired inside those marble walls. Headlines began rolling out within minutes, bold and breathless. Elon Musk, the legal maverick redefining courtroom battles. Musk's courtroom masterclass shocks legal experts. A new chapter in law and innovation. Musk turns the tables. Major news outlets ran side-by-side commentary, analysts piecing apart his arguments with a mix of astonishment and reluctant admiration. Some legal scholars, interviewed live, admitted they had never seen anything quite like it. A non-lawyer holding his ground, armed with intellect, foresight, and strategy against one of the sharpest judicial minds on the bench. Inside the courtroom, those who had witnessed it firsthand gave hushed interviews outside. I came in thinking he was just a showman, said one lawyer, still shaking his head. But what he did in there, that wasn't a show. That was a mind operating at a level most of us just don't see. Another observer, a constitutional law student who had waited hours to get a seat, was nearly breathless. It was like watching two titans argue not just about today's law, but about the future. And somehow, Musk wasn't out of place. As the public discussion exploded across social media, Musk himself, true to form, kept his response characteristically light and cryptic. An hour after stepping out of the courthouse, he posted a simple tweet. Passed the bar today, no exam required. It broke the internet within minutes. Millions liked and retweeted it. Memes followed almost instantly. Musk standing atop a gavel-shaped rocket, Musk wearing a judge's robe over a SpaceX suit. Musk seated behind a courtroom bench, captioned, Chief Justice of Mars. But beneath the humor, a quieter truth rippled through the chaos. Musk had not just defended himself. He had changed the tone of the conversation between innovation and the law. He had demanded, and earned, a seat at the table where the future's rules would be written. And somewhere behind the heavy doors of her chambers, Judge Coney Barrett allowed herself a rare private smile. History had been made, and it was only just beginning.